Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The morning sun barely filtered through the ancient stained-glass windows of St. Clement's Church. Each colored ray landed on the polished wooden pews, casting flashes of red and blue that trembled slightly, as if animated by a life of their own. The air was thick, saturated with the scent of burning incense and old wood, and an almost solemn silence enveloped the kneeling faithful. Father Benoit, his black cassock impeccably pressed, advanced slowly between the rows, his deep voice echoing against the stone walls, "Lord, hear our prayers." Each word seemed suspended in the air, and everyone held their breath, immersed in devotion. Then, a bark broke the silence. Sharp, powerful, almost mechanical. Breath caught in the church. The faithful looked up, surprised, worried. A second bark, louder, echoed against the walls, followed by an insistent series. On the threshold stood a massive black dog, its fur bristling, its eyes sparkling with a strange, almost supernatural light. It looked at no one. It stared only at the statue of the Virgin Mary, its body tense, its barks echoing like a warning. A chill ran through the church. Children huddled close to their parents, and muffled cries escaped from the pews. Candles flickered for no apparent reason, casting dancing shadows on the walls, while an icy breeze swept through the church, lifting strands of hair and rustling fabrics. The stained-glass windows seemed to darken, as if the light itself hesitated to enter. Father Benoit took a step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. But the dog didn't move. Each bark seemed laden with meaning, and everyone in the church sensed they were witnessing something beyond mere reality. The creature's gaze seemed to pierce the statue, scrutinizing something hidden behind the marble, something no one else could see. Trembling whispers rose. "What is it?" "It's impossible." Everyone's heart beat faster, fear seeping into every soul present. The dog continued its silent defiance of the Virgin Mary, and for the first time, everyone understood that this moment would never be forgotten. The ordinary had just given way to the inexplicable. Father Benoit took a few cautious steps toward the dog, his trembling hand raised slightly in a gesture of peace. But the creature did not move. Its black eyes shone with an almost human intensity, and each bark seemed like a warning aimed directly at the priest's heart. The faithful remained frozen, some clutching the pews, others kneeling, unable to look away. The air in the church had become heavy, thick with an almost palpable tension. The wooden pews seemed to vibrate with collective fear, and each person's breath formed small clouds visible in the dim candlelight. Father Benoit murmured a prayer, hoping to calm the beast, but the dog paid no heed. It barely moved forward, but its posture indicated unwavering determination. Then, suddenly, it took another step, and the statue of the Virgin Mary seemed to tremble slightly. A shiver ran down the spines of all the faithful. Some closed their eyes, unable to look, others remained frozen, fascinated despite themselves by the strangeness of the scene. The barking grew hoarse, more insistent, echoing through the church like a warning from another world. The walls seemed to absorb and amplify the sound, each echo striking the heart of everyone present. Father Benoit stepped back slightly, a bead of sweat forming on his temple. Deep down, he knew this dog was no ordinary one. Suddenly, the dog stopped dead in its tracks. Its eyes were fixed on a specific point behind the statue. The worshippers turned to see what the dog had spotted, but there was nothing visible. Yet, the silence had become oppressive, almost deafening. Everyone could feel the invisible danger hanging in the air, as if the statue itself were holding its breath. Father Benoit, pale, murmured, "Lord, show us the truth." But in the church, only tension remained, and the dog, faithful invisible guardian of an unknown mystery, continued to defy the whole world. The heavy silence that followed the dog's sudden stop seemed to last an eternity. The faithful held their breath, each sensing deep down that something abnormal was happening. The candles still flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance on the walls, as if mirroring the tension of the scene. Then, a faint chill ran through the church. The cold, unusual for a summer morning, seeped into the clothes of the faithful, creeping down to their bones. Children shivered, clutching their parents' hands, while some murmured trembling prayers. Even Father Benoit felt his heart sink, unable to explain this sensation of supernatural intrusion. The stained-glass windows, which usually cast warm bursts of colored light, seemed to darken at times, as if an invisible shadow were passing through them. The statue of the Virgin Mary, usually still and serene, appeared strangely alive. A drop of moisture beaded on the statue's cheek, reflecting the flickering candlelight. Was it water, or tears? No one could say. The dog, still motionless, continued to stare at the statue. Its hoarse barks resumed, shorter but more insistent, as if it were conveying an urgent warning. Each time a worshipper tried to approach, it instinctively retreated, overcome by an inexplicable unease. As Father Benoit cautiously advanced, a subtle noise was heard, a slight creaking from the back of the statue, almost imperceptible. The priest stopped abruptly, breathless. The dog growled softly, its fur bristling, its eyes still fixed on that spot behind the Virgin. The murmurs turned into panicked whispers, "Look! There's something!" But no one dared approach. Even the priest, accustomed as he was to the mysteries of the faith, felt a mixture of fear and reverence. Time seemed to stand still in the church. The cold, the creaking, the flickering light, the dog, everything converged on a single point, invisible yet palpable, behind the statue. The worshippers, pale, understood that what they were seeing was not a simple sign, but a warning. And what the dog was protecting or revealing was beyond human comprehension. Father Benoit advanced slowly, each step weighing like a hammer blow against his heart. The dog followed him with its eyes, motionless but vigilant, its black eyes shining like shards of obsidian. The faithful were frozen, unable to look away, their hands gripping the pews, their lips murmuring silent prayers. Then, a deep rumble resonated throughout the church, as if the stone itself were vibrating. The noise seemed to come from behind the statue of the Virgin Mary, where no one had yet dared to look. A fine dust began to fall from the arches of the ceiling, floating in the rays of light like particles of gold trembling in the air. The dog barked again, but this time its cry was different. It was no longer anger, but an urgent warning, imbued with an almost human intelligence. The stained-glass windows trembled, and a flash of light, like an invisible flame, seemed to pierce the statue. The lips of the faithful trembled, some falling to their knees, unable to bear the tension. Suddenly, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement occurred behind the Virgin. Father Benoit leaned forward, holding his breath, and saw a slight stirring, as if something were trying to manifest itself. His hands rose in prayer, but his heart was pounding. The dog took a step back, its eyes fixed on whatever it seemed to be protecting or warning. A faint, almost inaudible voice seemed to come from the statue itself. "Help me," it murmured, and the sound resonated through the church like an echo from another world. The candles flickered violently, casting distorted shadows on the walls, and the worshippers froze in terror and wonder. Father Benoit felt an icy chill seep into his soul. He understood that this was no longer just a church or a statue. Something greater, something more ancient, had just awakened. The dog, silent and faithful guardian, had finally calmed down, as if it knew the moment had come to reveal the mystery. Everyone went pale. The whisper of the statue, the piercing gaze of the dog, and the dull rumble of the stones formed a terrifying and incomprehensible whole. Only one certainty remained: what had just appeared behind the Virgin was not human, and no one would ever be the same after that morning. No sooner had the statue's murmur been heard than the atmosphere in the church changed completely. The air became heavy, almost suffocating, charged with an energy no one could explain. The faithful held their breath, their gaze fixed on the point behind the statue, but nothing human yet appeared. The dog began to growl softly, its muscles tense, every hair bristling like a silent warning. The candles flickered furiously, casting dancing shadows on the walls and on the faces of the worshippers. Some flames went out on their own, while others burned with an unnatural intensity. A chilling breath swept through the church, sending shivers down the spines of every worshipper. Trembling stained-glass windows reflected strange glimmers off the stones, creating shifting shapes that seemed almost alive. Panicked whispers turned to stifled screams as drops of water, invisible yet real, fell from the ceiling, striking the faces and hands of the faithful. Father Benoit, pale and trembling, stepped forward again. Each step echoed like a thunderclap in the heavy silence. The dog retreated slightly, never taking its eyes off him, as if to warn him to be careful. Then a new rumble resounded, louder, deeper, seeming to come not only from behind the statue, but from every stone in the church. The faithful rose abruptly, some trying to flee, but their legs refused to move. Fear had frozen their bodies and minds. A pale, almost spectral light emanated from the statue. The Virgin's features seemed to transform, her eyes taking on a human depth, her lips making an imperceptible movement as if she were trying to speak. Then, a piercing cry erupted from behind the statue, followed by a violent blast that swept through the church. The dog howled in turn, but this time it was no longer a simple bark, it was a desperate warning. The faithful fell to their knees, some weeping, others paralyzed with terror. Father Benoit felt his heart sink. He understood that what he was witnessing transcended reason and faith. The church was no longer simply a place of worship. It had become the stage for a supernatural event whose magnitude was still impossible to comprehend. The dog, a silent guardian, kept its eyes fixed on the mystery behind the statue, while collective fear took deep root in the soul of every parishioner present. Deep down, everyone knew that the moment of revelation was approaching, and that what was about to happen would change everything forever. The oppressive silence that followed the dog's howls seemed to suspend time. Each worshipper held their breath, frozen by fear and fascination. The candles still flickered, casting trembling shadows on the walls, and the icy breath that swept through the church made even the bravest shiver. Then, slowly, the statue of the Virgin Mary seemed to come to life. Her eyes, once fixed in a serene gaze, took on a disturbing intensity, shining with a pale, supernatural light. A clear voice, weak but distinct, resonated in the icy air, "Help me." The faithful, frozen to their feet, felt a shiver run down their spines. Some fell to their knees, others hid their faces, unable to bear the sight. Father Benoit, his face pale and his voice trembling, murmured a prayer, trying to understand what he was seeing. The dog, still at the entrance, growled one last time before freezing completely. It stared at the statue with an intensity that seemed almost human, as if it recognized the presence of an invisible force behind the marble. The barking ceased, replaced by a tense silence. Suddenly, a slight movement behind the Virgin caught the priest's attention. The marble seemed to vibrate, as if something were trying to pass through it. An indistinct figure slowly emerged, enveloped in a soft but unsettling light. The contours of a human face appeared, and every worshipper felt terror and wonder mingle in a single shudder. "Who are you?" stammered Father Benoit, unable to look away. The voice, now clearer, seemed to answer from the very heart of the statue, "I have been held here for centuries." The cold intensified, and the breath of the faithful transformed into clouds visible in the flickering light. The stained glass windows seemed to darken at times, reinforcing the impression that the church itself breathed in rhythm with this revelation. The dog, motionless, continued to protect the mystery, like a faithful and silent guardian. Everyone then understood that the church that morning was not simply a place of prayer. It was the scene of an ancient event, a secret that had finally been revealed. Fear, mingled with an unspeakable fascination, enveloped every soul present. And everyone knew, instinctively, that what followed would reveal even more terrifying truths. The entire church was plunged into an electric silence, broken only by the short breaths of the faithful and the subtle creaking of the old beams. Each person felt the fear differently, some trembled, others prayed frantically, while still others remained petrified, unable to move. The black dog, always motionless at the entrance, seemed to focus all its attention on the statue, as if guided by an invisible force. Its eyes reflected a supernatural intelligence, and every movement of its ears or body conveyed a silent alert that no one dared ignore. Suddenly, the candles went out at once, plunging the church into semi-darkness. The stained glass windows, deprived of their usual light, cast ghostly shadows on the walls. Panicked whispers turned into muffled cries as light impacts, like invisible tappings, were felt on the pews and the stone floor. Father Benoit, pale and trembling, tried to gather the faithful. "Remain calm," he shouted, but his voice seemed weak against the intensity of the phenomenon. The very air seemed to vibrate, as if the church were holding its breath. The faithful began to huddle together, sensing that something greater and older than all of humanity was manifesting. Cold drops suddenly fell from the ceiling, seemingly from nowhere. Some saw water, others tears, but all felt fear intensify with each touch. The statue in the center of the church seemed to watch every movement, its eyes still shining with an otherworldly light. The dog barked one last time, short but powerful, and that cry seemed to resonate in the soul of each worshipper. Then, it stood still, as if waiting for everyone to understand. What they had just seen was not just a warning, it was a call to vigilance. A deep, collective fear took hold. Murmurs of prayer mingled with the silent panic, and everyone in the church felt that this moment would be etched in their memory forever. Even Father Benoit, usually the master of his place of worship, understood that what followed would reveal even more terrifying and unavoidable truths. Father Benoit, his face pale and his hands trembling, felt that the moment had come to act. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart, then cautiously approached the statue, reciting prayers in a low, almost pleading voice. The black dog, still at the entrance, stood up on its paws, staring at the priest with an almost human intensity. Benedict's every move was scrutinized with unsettling precision. The faithful watched, petrified, unable to move. The entire church seemed to hold its breath. As Father Benoit finally placed his hands on the base of the statue, an icy blast swept through the room, extinguishing several candles at once. The stained glass windows flickered, casting distorted shadows on the walls and floor. The dog growled, warning the priest of some unseen danger. Then, the statue began to vibrate slightly, as if breathing. A soft but intense light emanated from its eyes, illuminating the church with a supernatural glow. The voice, this time clearer and more insistent, resonated throughout the building, "Help me." Father Benoit, despite the fear that paralyzed him, felt an invisible force guiding him. He recited stronger, more determined prayers and placed his hand on the Virgin's face. The dog immediately sat at his feet, calm but vigilant, as if recognizing the sincerity of the gesture. Suddenly, a violent wind seemed to sweep through the church, causing the remaining candles to flicker and the incense curtains to fly in all directions. The light emanating from the statue intensified, revealing behind it an indistinct but human form, as if someone or something were trying to fully manifest itself. Despite their terror, the faithful felt a strange sense of relief. The dog barked one last time, short but powerful, then lay peacefully at the foot of the statue. The shadow behind the Virgin stopped, motionless, as if it had been restrained by the priest's intervention. Father Benoit stepped back, panting, his hands still resting on the statue. The church, still thick with mystery and tension, seemed to have calmed slightly. The dog kept its gaze fixed on the statue, faithful and silent. Everyone then understood that, despite the fear and strange phenomena, Father Benoit's intervention had calmed, for the moment, the manifesting force. But the mystery remained, and everyone knew that what followed could reveal something even more terrifying. Once calm had returned, the Church of St. Clement was enveloped in a strange atmosphere, heavy with tension and mystery. The faithful remained motionless, some kneeling, others seated, their breaths still ragged. Deep down, each felt that what they had just experienced was unlike anything known or explained. Father Benoit, his hands trembling, gazed at the statue. The supernatural light that had emanated from it moments before seemed to have faded, but the Virgin's eyes still shone faintly, as if she carried within her a memory of that extraordinary moment. The black dog, faithful and silent, lay down at the foot of the altar, ever watchful, the unchanging guardian of a secret that no one fully understood. The faithful murmured among themselves, their voices still betraying fear and wonder. Some spoke of divine signs, others of invisible presences, but all understood that the experience had just changed them forever. Even the most skeptical were moved by the strange intensity of what they had experienced. Father Benoit sat up and tried to resume the Mass, but his words seemed almost empty, as if the weight of the mystery made every prayer harder to utter. Each word echoed through the church like a reminder that the ordinary had given way to the extraordinary. The dog, always silent, would sometimes raise its head to look behind the statue, as if to ensure that nothing would escape its notice. The faithful began to understand that this creature was not simply an animal. It was the witness and guardian of a truth that humankind was not yet ready to fully comprehend. At the end of Mass, as the faithful left the church, each carried away an indelible impression. The memory of the fear, the supernatural light, and the watchful dog remained etched in their minds. Some wished they could forget, but no one could erase what they had seen. The mystery remained, and all knew it would return to their memories every time they thought of St. Clement's Church. And as the door closed behind the last of the faithful, Father Benoit remained alone with the dog and the statue. One certainty dawned on him: the story they had experienced that morning would never be forgotten, and the shadow of mystery would continue to watch over the church, ready to reveal other secrets when the time was right. In the days following that memorable Mass, the Church of St. Clement never regained its usual tranquility. The inhabitants spoke in hushed tones of the black dog and the animated statue, some refusing to cross the threshold, others coming in secret, driven by a mixture of curiosity and fear. Father Benoit continued to pray every morning before the Virgin. The supernatural light that had shone forth that famous Sunday seemed to have withdrawn, but he still perceived a presence, discreet but constant, as if the statue barely breathed, aware of every movement around it. The dog, faithful and silent, appeared every morning in the churchyard. He watched the worshippers with a grave and attentive gaze, as if to ensure that the mystery remained protected. Those who tried to approach too closely felt a tension in the air, an icy chill that reminded them that certain forces should not be disturbed. Strange phenomena continued to occur: candles that lit themselves, stained glass windows that projected unusual glare, and sometimes, a light but cold breeze that swept through the church without anyone being able to determine its source. The faithful recounted fleeting visions, barely visible figures behind the Virgin, or whispers that could only be heard with the heart. The inhabitants began to understand that this mystery wasn't limited to a single event. The church had become a place where the visible and the invisible intersected, where time sometimes seemed to stand still. Some saw it as a miracle, others as an ancient warning. All, however, felt that this mystery was completely beyond their comprehension. Father Benoit, though deeply troubled, accepted that his mission was no longer simply to guide the faithful, but also to protect this secret. The black dog, a silent guardian, seemed to share this understanding. Together, priest and dog formed a fragile yet resolute bulwark between the ordinary world and the mystery that dwelt within the church. Each visitor left St. Clement changed, carrying with them the indelible memory of the otherworldly light, the cold breath, and the unsettling yet captivating presence of the dog and the statue. And even when silence returned, each knew, deep down, that the mystery persisted, ready to reveal itself again when the time was right. Weeks passed, but the Church of St. Clement remained marked by the supernatural event. The faithful, even those who returned regularly, now entered with a certain humility, a mixture of awe and respect for this place that had become unique. Father Benoit continued his daily prayers, but he had changed. His face now held a new gravity, and his sermons, though faithful to doctrine, conveyed a silent warning: some forces are beyond human comprehension. The priest knew that the mystery behind the statue and the black dog was not solved, and that the church had become the point of contact between the visible and the invisible. The dog, ever faithful and silent, remained at the entrance, observing every movement. He wouldn't let anyone approach the statue too closely, as if to remind everyone that human curiosity must be tempered with caution. The faithful understood that he was not just an animal, but the guardian of an ancient secret, charged with protecting the balance between the material world and the supernatural. And the Virgin, motionless yet still bathed in a soft, strange light, seemed to convey a silent message: vigilance, humility, and respect. The mystery that had shaken the church that morning had become a living lesson for all who had witnessed the event. Every person who left St. Clement took this lesson with them. The bravest returned to pray, the most cautious preferred to observe from afar, but all knew that the church was no longer just a place of worship, it was a witness to the inexplicable, a guardian of ancient secrets, and a reminder that some forces surpass human understanding. The black dog, faithful and silent, continued to watch. And in every breath of wind that swept through the church, in every shadow cast by the stained glass windows, the presence of the mystery reminded attentive souls. St. Clement was no longer simply a church. It was a place where fear, faith, and the inexplicable had met, forever etching an indelible memory into the hearts of all. And so, the lesson remained: respect what we cannot understand, listen to what does not speak, and remember that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but to be felt.